Xavier basketball is off to a 3-0 start. Three bye games for the Musketeers before a big one on Wake Forest coming up. But we are here to break down any takeaways from those first three games and preview this huge Skip Prosser Classic. It's back against the Demon Deacons. But once again, thanks for tuning in to the Musketeer Madness podcast. I'm Ben Haller, as always. That's John Baldridge. And John, 3-0 after the first three weeks. Since when we're filming this, yesterday was the or first three games. Since when we're filming this, yesterday was the win over Jackson State, which I think is a little reassuring after the first two games.
Yeah, the first game, we talked about only four guys scored. Your bench really struggled. You got 3 points from your bench against Texas Southern. But I feel like the last two games, you really turned it around. That 2 games ago, everybody scored. Last night, it felt really reassuring to have those 42 points from your bench. You didn't have to play Freeman a lot in that second half. Yes, you're playing a bye team and a team that in Jackson State that doesn't have a home game until January 11th this year. So they go on a long road stretch. But you look at their schedule, they have a lot of tough games here to start. So Xavier really came out, played well early on. I was excited about that. And Sean Miller really talked about getting that early jump to start the ball game and just a very dominating win last night.
Yeah, they're 3-0. And the big question to this point is just what do you make of the first three games? Obviously, three very different stages, I think. Now, Texas Southern is actually the best team out of those three by a
Yeah.
decent margin when you look at IUND and Jackson State. They were picked to finish second in the SWAC. But it's that first game, hard to take away. I think what you look at when you look around the power conferences right now with so many teams that are filled with transfer portal guys, teams are getting off to slower starts, and that adds to a couple of things. Number one, these bye games are going to be closer than you saw in the past. Yeah, when the 2015 to 2018 years when Xavier had the same core returning, it seemed like every single season, and they were blowing every single bye team out by 35, 40. It makes a little more sense for that to happen than right now when you have guys who have not played together in a real game setting like that. When Texas Southern was the first time. And then also on the other end, some of those bye teams are just better, more talented because you're getting all of these fifth year, sixth year seniors, guys who have been at those schools for a long time and getting a lot of experience and getting some time to shine at those particular schools. So not only is it leading to closer bye games, it's also leading to some losses. We have had a lot of bye losses to the first, 10 days of the college basketball season. Big East fans know that too well. Four losses in the Big East so far, two by Nova, one from Seton Hall, one for Butler, which is not pretty on that end. So I don't think there's much concern on my end for the first couple of games for Xavier. I think what you saw, if you told me before those games and you said there are going to be some issues, I would have predicted what those issues are, which are, the bench not really getting as involved. Sometimes that's a tough thing to do when you're coming into a season like that. And you mentioned it, first game of the year, the concern was, all right, Sean's been talking so much about the depth of this team and how that's going to be such a big part as opposed to a team like last year. And you said it best. I think it was only four guys had more than 2 points in that game. If you eliminated those four guys, I think it was Conwell, Freeman, Swain, and McKnight. If you limited those four guys, Xavier went 0 for 16. And outside of Ryan Conwell, I think it was like 1 for 13 from three. So the depth, I was very happy to see on Tuesday against Jackson State. You totally flipped the script. Six guys in double figures, three of them on the bench.
Yeah, the presser was really interesting last night. I thought Marcus Foster talked about this is the most depth he's been a part of. He played for Furman for a couple of years, but you look at that bench and you look at the numbers last night. Maddox had 16, Trey Green had 15, John Hughley had 11, Jerome Hunter had a good game 2 games back, kind of struggled last night, but you're starting to see that slowly come together, and that's what you want to see early on, Ben, to start the year. When you have these bye games, you have opportunities, the teams you're expected to beat, when you get ready for a Wake Forest this weekend, a chance for a real power to come inside the Cintas Center. And Sean in his presser yesterday really talked about the crowd. That's one thing Xavier's really been good at with these bye games. Yes, they don't have a football team here, so basketball takes key here in dominance at Xavier. And having 10,000 in there on an 8:30 start on a Tuesday night when it's kind of rainy outside just showed how much basketball means to the Xavier community. And now a chance for a Wake Forest to come in town for a noon game on Saturday, a team that's very highly ranked this year, and a chance to take on a very good basketball team. And really, it's the first opportunity for Xavier to show how good they are.
Yeah, I think going back to the first three games, if we want to stick on Jackson State from a couple of days ago, I think it was big to get a couple different guys confidence. I think one of the biggest things you saw in the first game was just so many transfers from mid-major schools, or maybe from bigger schools that didn't get a ton of playing time or were injured, like Hughley. And I think what you saw was just some first game jitters, some nerves, and it finally seems like they're working those out now that we're through three games. I mean, one of the biggest examples, I think, I was so thrilled to see Dante Maddox yesterday light up. It was garbage time. I know those points don't mean much. I know those minutes don't mean much. But for somebody who had not done anything the first few games, he needed those last few minutes to just see that he can do that at the Division One level. See a few shots go down in a game in the Cintas Center. I'm really excited about that. Also, Trey Green's kind of in that boat. I'm never, believe me, if there's anyone's confidence I'm not worried about, it's Trey Green. He's one of the most confident shooters, most confident players out there. But I think just being able to do that in the game, it can just help it even more. And I think we saw Trey Green's true potential yesterday with 15 points, knocked down a few threes. He was talking a little bit to the defenders. So seeing that bench in Green and in Maddox, obviously Hughley in there as well. He scored 11 yesterday. He looked pretty tough on some of those takes. I was not familiar with some of the things that he could do, starting a dribble maybe at the perimeter. But this is a Xavier team. We saw 6 double-digit scorers yesterday. Here's my hot take at this point in the year. I think the Xavier team will end the season with 6 different guys averaging double figures. Now, I don't know exactly who those 6 are going to be, but that's my take right now.
Yeah, you go back to that game on Tuesday and airing this tomorrow on Thursday. I thought the way Sean Miller wrapped up his press conference, I got a chance to ask him in his presser yesterday about Trey Green, a guy who has all this hype coming into Xavier, was highly ranked as a 4-star coming here to Xavier. And what has he shown this year and where does he need to get a little better? And Sean answered it perfectly. I thought, he's shot the ball excellently in last night, 15 points in the ball game. And he can really shoot the three well, as we talked about in that podcast you've seen that come out, the documentary shows just how Trey Green means to this team that came out last night all in. Great job by Paul Frischner and Adam Bound to put that together. But I really thought the one thing Green and Miller talked about needs to work on is just defending. Sometimes his height is his problem and getting to stop, bigger defenders at that point guard position. And, of course, Trey Green has plenty of time to progress and get better because you do have Davion McKnight for this season, but he'll be gone next year. And it's time for Trey Green's to step up a little more. And I think he's showing that this year and just trying to get better on that bench slowly as we get him in spots the rest of the season.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up all in. That was great. I know a lot of Xavier fans were excited about that. I'm not in Cincinnati at the moment. I will be driving up for the Wake Forest game Saturday and was there last week, but not in Cincinnati, so I don't get the Fox 19. So I was just waiting for 12:31 to see the first episode of All In. Yeah, but like you said, great job by Paul Frischner, Adam Baum. Josh Semstrat did an awesome job too. Shout out to the Mason Integrated Media Program, Mason alum. But yeah, that was really cool. Look, a lot of college teams don't do that. So
Yeah.
for those who don't know my background, I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but I grew up a diehard Xavier fan. Season tickets to Xavier my whole life. Xavier will always be my favorite sports team. I went to Indiana. I go to Indiana currently, so I am heavily, despite what's happening this year, heavily a basketball school. And the amount of times like I've colleagues talk about how cool they think having a show like that for them would be, and just the fact that how unique it is for Xavier to have it. If a big school, basketball school like Indiana doesn't, it's pretty cool that Xavier has that, and obviously speaks to the couple things, the media that Xavier has, and then also the access that Sean Miller loves to allow to other media members. But that's been a ton of fun. But yeah, that's my rant on how awesome All In was. I think
Yeah, I
about
think, I got a chance to catch up with Dante Jackson a lot, and he always talks about how tough this conference is, not just playing in it, but also having an opportunity to coach in this conference with this team day in and day out. And, you see that. I mean, you take on a UConn team that's won the national championship in 2 years. You got Patino in this conference. You got Providence. You got Georgetown. I mean, it is tough to win on the road, and that was really, portrayed last night a lot. Of course, we'll air this tomorrow, so 2 days back. But, portrayed a lot of how much it means to the Xavier program and how tough it is just to win here at Xavier. And Sean's doing a great job of that, and 3-0 to start the season. But we'll get on to Wake Forest now if you want.
Yeah, no, I know, and I wanted to say a little something about Trey Green too. Is it's not just about Trey Green in general. I think we've said this before. If you're looking at concerns, the defense has not been great to start the year. Only 57 points to Jackson State is an improvement for sure, but giving up 80 points to IU Indy is not good. And I know that you beat IU Indy by more than you beat Texas Southern, and the second half looked pretty offensively for Xavier against IU Indy. If I'm Xavier, I want to flush that game down my memory more than I want to flush the Texas Southern game because IU Indy's not a good team. They're not going to be a good team this year. A lot of D2 transfers in that starting lineup. They're really just trying to figure things out. It's a program that's been through a lot recently. But back to my point being, the defense has struggled a lot. I think a lot of it's just going to be because this team does not have a ton of height. You look at some of the guards that are getting a lot of playing time. Trey Green stands at about 6 foot, listed at 6 foot. Davion McKnight's listed at 6 foot, and who knows if they actually are 6 foot. Dante Maddox listed at like 6'2", I think. So you're getting playing time from three smaller guards, and now with Traore out, Fremantle and Hughley being the only true bigs on this Xavier team, I think it's just going to be something that they have to deal with throughout the year, and something that they kind of have to adjust to. And a big reason that Saturday's game against Wake Forest gets really interesting because if you look at this Wake Forest team, they have a dominant scoring big man, someone who could play big in Hunter Salas. And I'm really interested to see how Xavier Biggs defended.
Yeah, Davion McKnight had 4 fouls in the game back on Tuesday, and he got them early on in that second half. I thought the way this bench is and this depth of this roster this year is put together is a huge testament to Sean Miller, because when you have a guy like Davion McKnight go down last year, you have a problem of who you're going to put in. But now you have Trey Green, you have Ryan Conwell, you have guys who get the ball off the floor. And yes, 80 points isn't great, but you look back at that game, Davion did shoot the ball very well, and the defense got better on Tuesday. But yeah, you still got questions of worry. Can Xavier put it together against a good opportunity and a good team, really? And this opportunity comes on Saturday.
Yeah, so a little bit about Wake Forest. They come into the year. I did not get a chance. I'll look at it now to look at the AP poll for this previous week. But the preseason AP poll, Xavier was third in receiving votes. Wake Forest was right behind Xavier, fifth in receiving votes, I believe. And they, with a lot of bye games happening the first week, Wake Forest got a win over a power conference team, but a pretty solid power conference team at that in Michigan. They played a home game against the Wolverines in Winston-Salem, and they took a 2-point win over a pretty good Michigan team. Um, this is a Wake Forest team that is not built of a ton of transfers, really, at least compared to a lot of other ACC teams and other power conference teams you're going to see. They're built of guys that they've had for a while. They're a really experienced team. That's why people like them a lot, just because they haven't had a ton of success maybe in the last few years, but they finally are bringing a lot of pieces together that have just played together for a while. One of them being Hunter Salas, like I talked about. He's listed as a guard, but he could play pretty big. He's 6'5". That's why it's a really interesting matchup. If I had to beg to guess, it would be that Dalen Swain guards Hunter Salas, but just a really good score the last couple of seasons for Wake Forest. If you look at his numbers last year, averaged 18 points a game, and it was actually not the last couple of years, a big jump. 4.5 points per game a couple of seasons ago, 18 points per game in the ACC a season ago. He shoots the three-point ball really well at a 41% clip. Um, this is a tough test for Xavier's young, incredibly talented, incredibly gifted and athletic Dalen Swain having to guard Hunter Salas. And that is the matchup I'm most excited to see.
This is going to be a tough matchup, a fun game to watch. And, you look at this game, and one stat really stands out to me for Xavier. We talk about the size for Wake Forest. We talk about how good they shoot the basketball. I would say one thing that stands out is second chance points. A Xavier team that had 6 second chance points against Texas Southern. You go back to Tuesday night, they had 8 second chance points. The team really is led by the three ball. You believe in Conwell to make threes. You got Fremantle shut the three really well. You talk about Davion McKnight, who can get inside but also kick it out and look for threes with Swain. So the question is, can Xavier get second chance opportunities? And I don't know if they will or won't be able to. But if they can't shoot the three well, if they are not able to make shots in the game, and we'll see that at some point this year, but it's not Wake Forest, another team inside the Big East later on in the season. Can Xavier be able to get on the glass and get second chance, third chance looks?
I don't have the exact numbers on it, but it's interesting you bring that point up because just to the naked eye, Xavier has not rebounded offensively that well, especially when you consider that they're playing some of these bye teams that just don't have a lot of size. And you feel like you should have a lot of advantage. I know we just talked about Xavier not having a lot of size, but that's more comparable to a bye team instead of a team like Wake Forest and other teams they're going to see in the Big East. So I'm interested to see how they do that as well. There's a difference, I think, between, and I think Xavier, on one hand, has both of these things, a difference between balance at the top and depth. Depth, having a lot of guys in the bench you can go to. Balance at the top, just being you don't necessarily have someone who's averaging 25 points a game, but you have a bunch of guys who are averaging double figures. And I think that's what Xavier's going to end the season with. It's hard to predict right now who's going to be the leading scorer, but that is what Wake Forest has with Trevon Spillers and Cameron Hildreth up there as well as Hunter Salas. Just three really solid scorers that like to share the wealth. And once again, the matchups thing I'm really interested to. Trevon Spiller's kind of that bigger guy, but he's more of a four. See, this is where if you go with the Foster Swain starting lineup like they have at the 3 and 4, maybe it's Foster who takes Salas and then Swain takes Spillers. That what makes more sense size wise. But I think Xavier's best bet, just with how good of a defender Swain's been, is you put Swain on Salas and Foster on Sellers.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough matchup for Swain, or if we see Foster there. I think you look down at the back end of the bench. I mean, you still got to have productivity inside. We talked about not getting those second chance looks against Jackson State on Tuesday. You got to have Hughley involved. You got to get Fremantle involved, and you got to get some points from Hunter. Had no points in the ball game in 17 minutes on Tuesday. I think you got to get him. And Sean Miller talked about it in his presser. Starting to get Hunter more involved, and he thinks Hunter will get there later on this year. But if you want to play good against Wake Forest, I do think the inside has to play very well and get the ball down into him and be able to get points in the paint.
Yeah, and Wake Forest got a transfer in big man this year, Efton Reed,
Yeah.
7 footer. So that's going to be interesting to see. This Xavier team hasn't necessarily dealt with somebody that big up to this point in the season. So how Fremantle deals with Reed, I know, and Xavier fans know too well, Fremantle being in this program for his 6th year now, that Fremantle has had his defensive struggles. So I think this is a good test. Efton Reed is not necessarily some outstanding offensive player. He doesn't really shoot the three. He is decently efficient. 47% from the field is pretty good overall. But as a big man, especially as a 7 footer, that's nothing crazy. It's another test. Again, Efton Reed's not going to be the best big that Zach Fremantle plays. Ryan Kalkbrenner, if you look at what Ryan Kalkbrenner's been doing through
Yeah.
the first few games for Creighton, but somebody who's still pretty capable of being able to score the ball pretty well compared to some of the bigs that Fremantle's had to guard the first 3 games. You bring up an interesting point about Hunter. Um, Once again, it's what I said at the beginning of the season. I think the expectations had to be lowered for Jerome Hunter a little bit, just because everything has gone through. Obviously, the heart attack and then the torn Achilles right after the heart attack. Um, it's tough. It's obviously tough to deal with, and I said, I think my exact words after the IU, or no, it was after the Texas Southern game was, look, he looked like somebody who was coming off both of those things. You can't really expect much from him the first few games. I'd really love to see if that comes around later in the season. There's no guarantee that it does, but that's what Xavier having so much depth really helps out. And John Hughley finally taking that step last night's huge to see that if Xavier's depth down low can match Wake Forest depth down low.
Sean talked about the rebounding on Tuesday night, and they got out rebounded in the second half by Jackson State, and just showing that they need to rebound better, especially when you don't have Freeman on the ball game, and when you take him out for stretches in a close game, you're going to need Xavier to rebound better if they want to win against Wake Forest on Saturday. But you gotta like the way talking about Fremantle, hit on him for a moment. A guy who's really stepped up and been a crucial leader this year. I mean, he's hitting the three ball really well. He went 4 for 5 from the three on Tuesday, had 21 points, 4 boards. He's averaging only 24 minutes in that game, but he's a guy that you're going to have to lead on Saturday and expect to get 35, 36, 37 minutes out of him, I would say, to have a chance to win the basketball game.
Yeah. I actually think it was John Rothstein who had a pretty interesting tweet today. Obviously, this is paraphrasing because I don't have it pulled up, but it was something along the lines of These bye games can show you rotations. They could show you what matchups, or rather, what combinations on the floor work well together. They're not going to give you a ton on how good your team is, as long as you avoid those losses to buy in those bye games to mid-major teams, and that's what Xavier's done through the first three games. The biggest thing is to not get too high on hay. They scored 94 points and made 16 threes against Jackson State. And it's not to be, oh my gosh, they only beat Texas Southern by 9. There's got to be some sort of middle ground there. But what you can take into account is here's some lineups that worked really well together. Um, the starting lineup, I think for the most part, is been the best five. I know that's not like a hot take or something surprising coming into a year, but Marcus Foster, he's even struggled a little bit the first three games. Still, along there with Swain, Freemantle, McKnight, and Conwell's looked really good. Hughley coming into the game, I like the pairing of Trey Green and Davion McKnight a lot. I think they're really good at finding each other.
Yeah.
The problem obviously becomes you have two 6-footers into the game, so you kind of have to wait until there's someone smaller on the other team to put a lineup like that in. But when you have two great passers like that on the floor, look how well Davion McKnight's been shooting the ball from three this year too. And obviously, you know that the shooting ability of Trey Green. So you finally get that those combinations and them finding each other pretty well. That's another, once again, a combination that I think has looked great for Xavier.
Yeah, I think the way Marcus Foster talked about it, he hasn't seen this much death and being around a part of it. I think the question for Xavier bringing in, Foster, bringing in Maddox, bringing in Conwell, what's question is, will this team come together and bond together? I think we've seen that early out and early on. Talked about the documentary that showed, how they've been able to do that. But Xavier's done a great job of bringing this team together. And there is so much depth. There is so much potential for this team. We talked about it before we started the season, where we expect the team to go this year. And we both mentioned Sweet 16 is a possibility, even further than that. So there is a lot, but Xavier, now has to put it all together against a good basketball team in Wake Forest. And, you have to be able to find that rotation. I think the rotation is understandable. You're going to have Conwell, you're going to have McKnight, you're going to probably have Swain and Freemantle. And sometimes you might throw in Trey Green, you might throw in Foster, you might throw in Hughley, you might throw in Maddox. So the question is where does that fifth guy come from? And Xavier has done a good job winning their first three, but now a chance here against Wake Forest to really put it together against a top team in the college basketball spectrum.
Yeah, last thing I'll say about this Wake Forest game before we make our predictions for this game. I think I want to paint the picture very closely to the 2022 team, because that was a team that actually had a lot of returners, as opposed to transfer portal guys. But the leading scorer was a transfer portal guy, and the coach was a transfer portal guy. It was a new coach playing with a whole new team, the 22-23 season. And what you saw was they got off to a slow start to start the year. I think Xavier fans were frustrated with the Indiana loss at home to start that season. This feels pretty similar. Indiana that year is probably a little better than Wake Forest this year. So I think that it's important to preface by saying it is not the end of the world if things don't go the way Xavier fans want on Saturday against Wake Forest. The Wake Forest team that's played together for a while, I think it's going to take a little bit more time for Xavier as opposed to Wake Forest. By the way, I did look at the top 25 updated. Wake Forest actually jumped Xavier, so Wake Forest is third in receiving votes. So they're 28th of the country. Xavier's 29th, right behind them. So whoever wins this game, pretty good chance of being ranked. That's on the line as well. All right, John. Last thing. Let's make some predictions. You can go first.
As you mentioned, Xavier, this isn't, I'd say, an end-all be-all game for them. They still have a lot of
I
tough
agree.
competition. We haven't even got into conference play yet. And, Sean's talked about a lot. This team won't show their full potential until December, late December, into January. And here we are in November, sitting here on November 14th when this gets aired tomorrow. So I still think Xavier has a lot of time to get better. I don't see them pulling this thing out on Saturday. It's going to be a super close basketball game. Not that they're going to lose by less than 10. I say it's inside a 10.5 point ball game, but I think Wake Forest does come on the road. Just a little more expertise on their team, and they get the job done.
You got to give a score prediction. Got to pinpoint it, John.
All right, Ben. I'll give you 68. We'll go 68-60 for Wake Forest,
All right.
unfortunately.
You got a low scoring one. At John R. Baldridge for any Xavier fans who are unhappy with that pick and want to throw him a little bit of shade. I have Xavier pulling this one out. We are no strangers, you and me and all the viewers too are no strangers to the impact Cintas Center can have, especially early in a season. I think that just gives them that extra edge. I think talent-wise, they're very similar teams. Tuesday gives Xavier the confidence they need. They have Sean Miller at the helm. Another classic Skip Prosser game. I know a lot of times that these two teams played in the past, they maybe shouldn't have been close, but they were. This will be another close one, and it's a high-scoring one. I want 86-82. Xavier takes home the win and beats Wake Forest. I think that's something that Xavier fans would be a little more happy about my pick than your pick. But
Yeah. Well, Ben, let's tell them how you can get a hold of your Twitter
at
just
big
in case
underscore
maybe
Ben
I get.
Haller.
I'm right here. I don't know though. We'll see what happens.
If there's a Wake
I hope I'm
Forest
wrong. I
fan
hope I'm
listening,
wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
if there's a Wake Forest fan listening and wants to hate me for it, then whatever. Now it'll be a fun. I'm excited for Saturday. You'll be there. I'll be there. And sellout, I think, is expected. 10,250 others will be there. Xavier, Wake Forest at noon on Saturday on Fox Sports 1. Once again, everybody, I'm Ben Haller. That's John Baldridge. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Musketeer Madness podcast.